Philip, I am deeply interested in the question, does God exist? And I'll tell you what, for decades I was embarrassed to say so. I'm not embarrassed anymore. I am really interested in the question, does God exist? And frankly, I've heard a lot of opinions, philosophers, theologians, lots of atheists. If I come to you as a philosopher, asking you, how should I think about this question? What's your advice?
I suppose I have an answer that will seem surprising for a philosopher who is also a theist. I would begin with a question by saying why it would seem that no God exists. I approach the question from the probability that there is no God. I don't have to say too much about that. For people in a scientific age, there seem to be many reasons to doubt that we could know there's a God. There's a problem of evil, which makes us wonder how all the evil and suffering in the world is compatible with the existence of God. And I would actually make the case against the existence of God. And I presume at some point you might say, well, even if I'm a believer in God, I admit that there are some serious problems here. And then I would ask the question, yet as humans we seem to be preoccupied with this notion, a God, a highest reality, Brahman in the Hindu tradition, consciousness. Why is it that we are so perplexed by and preoccupied by this idea? And then I would say, well, maybe the idea of God exists just because it serves a function. Kant called it a regulative ideal. It expresses the ideal of moral perfection, perhaps. It expresses the idea of the completion of reason, a final truth that reason, science might converge upon. All these functions that the notion God might have. And then at the very end of the day, I would say, is it possible that this idea of God is something more than a merely functional idea?
And others would insert in there the evolutionary psychology that this has developed as part of our culture and group selection and all different ways that religion has a normative function for groups within this process. So it's easy to explain religion, theology, God in a naturalistic way. It may not be right, but it's certainly easy.
Yeah, that's my starting point. That I would expect that the word God would be explained by evolutionary psychology. Then I understand all the functions it serves, and then I ask the question, could there be any reality linked with that term? Is there any way that it could rise from the level of a regulative ideal, a kind of final idea of reason or morality or science or something?
Or a group rallying point.
Or as Durkheim tried to argue. Could it move from that to the level of expressing something metaphysically true? Could it be that under this world as we find it, there's some sort of deeper reality? Now, I guess I would say that reality might not look at all like the traditional religions. It might be very minimal, like a ground of all being.
Sure, because we haven't even defined God. We've left that to define it yourself. Whatever your definition is, how do I think about it? Yeah. So you're totally free to define it as you like.
Yeah. And I would start with that very, very minimal understanding.
Okay.
Is there some level of reality beyond the natural world as we find it around us?
Now, that's beyond the natural world as it will eventually occur. We call a final physics that take physics to its ultimate. Maybe it explains all sorts of things we have no idea of. But that this ground of being would have to be still beyond that.
Yeah, exactly. It would be an order of reality different from, and in some sense deeper than, what even a final physics could understand. And I have to say, we seem to be an animal that's preoccupied with this possibility. We think about life, we think about questions of death and significance and moral striving and so forth. And I think it's our fate, our heritage, and our great privilege as Homo sapiens to raise this question. And so, actually, I don't think that philosophy is a technical discipline at all. I think every animal that knows it will die, every one of us, he or she, is a philosopher and raises this question. Could there be a deeper dimension of reality?
So you're saying that it's the awareness of death potentially, that is the key energizer in the human longings to ask the God question.
Yeah, it's beautifully put. The German existentialist philosopher Martin Heidegger said that authentic life is lived before the horizon of death. And to live authentically in this moment is for me to run forward to the moment of my death and to live this moment against the horizon of my own finitude.
All right, so now where we are is we've established why God wouldn't exist. We now have this kind of longing that we all feel. We have a very general definition of God, so we're not encrusting it with all sorts of doctrines that would be contradictory or whatever. Question: how, if at all, we can now make the step from the longing to the assessment? What are the kinds of questions we can ask? Is there any progress that can be made?
Yeah. And for me, the interesting debate about the question of God, if one had time, world enough in time to pursue it, would be to take all the dimensions of human experience and to ask one by one, do we see in this dimension any, let's call it, intimations of transcendence? Maybe we do, that open us on to reflection on another horizon. And maybe we find that the progress of science or evolutionary biology closes down that. Mm-hmm. We pursue all the different dimensions, science, morality, but also aesthetics, the history of art and culture.
And in each one, look for hints of transcendence. Yeah. And if you can find them, then that indicates, and doesn't prove, indicates that maybe the quest is worth continuing.
It's a fantastic quest. And I think it is so deeply integrated with our humanity that I can't imagine being fully human without raising this question, which I would call the question of God.